Okay, Chad. So it's great that we can meet again. I appreciate that you made the time as well. Looking forward to our talk show today. We're going to be focusing on remote work and how that affects companies at the moment. I think that there's this huge change with regard to companies and how they're being affected by remote work. And I think that that doesn't only affect those companies, but it affects the staff of those companies. It affects everybody at every level, management, how teams are being managed, and so on. So I think it's definitely a topical subject, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that today as well.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Nice to see you, Randall.
Awesome. So to lead in, just for those who haven't seen our talk show before, it's workforce learning. That's the focus of what we want to talk about. And we're going to be covering various different topics. Today, we're focusing, as we said, on remote workforce and how they're affected. And a future topic that we want to cover is learning in the workforce and how that is affected. So to lead in, we just want to play our intro, and we hope you enjoy the show. I've got some very interesting studies that I want to share, and I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to share my screen, and then we can discuss these. I think that they are so topical, right? So let's have a look at some of these very, very interesting studies that have been conducted. Right. So this is a study by Forbes.com, and they discussed this is the future of remote work in 2021. So it's a very recent study, and some very interesting things came out in the study, which I think it's very valuable for us to share with our listeners and viewers. There's this huge drive for companies to have staff move from working on site to remote locations. And while that's not necessarily a drive that all companies are jumping into, it is certainly something that's been on the minds of a lot of corporates. There are many advantages to having a remote workforce, and we'll discuss some of those advantages shortly. But there are also some caveats that need to be considered before making that decision. And so what are some of the formats of companies and how they're managing their workforces and how they're adjusting to this change? Well, one of the things that they're doing is they're just blanket deciding this is it, we're going remote. So some of the larger companies are actually doing that, or some of the branches of some of the largest companies are doing that, and they've just decided that they're going to let their workforce work from home. It seems to have worked for them. It's primarily in the tech industry that this has been the case, but they've decided that it's worked for them through COVID. Now, obviously, we know COVID was a catalyst for this. We know that COVID made quite a big impact on companies and actually forced them to do this because they were no longer actually allowed to have their workforce come into the office for obvious reasons. So a lot of companies, while they had been considering this, were forced to just go for it, just do it. And so it's interesting to see what has happened and how this has affected companies. Any thoughts on that, Chad? What has your research revealed on that?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, these companies and organizations have been forced to adapt into this teleworking world that we're in now. They need to build this sort of hybrid solution for their companies so that they can, catch up and succeed. Something to consider, another obstacle is the relationship side of within the companies, the interpersonal relationship that they had with their colleagues. They had these pre-existing relationships, and this is an issue for some companies, especially new companies that are faced today. You must remember that they have these pre-existing relationships, and now any new employees or any new clients and that they have to build relationships with remotely is very difficult. We build trust between meetings. It's the social interactions that help us to do that. Isaac Stern once said that we build the music between the notes. I think that's a beautiful statement. So there's a couple ways to get around this, and you can't entirely, but some solutions are, having team huddles. On a Monday morning, you can have a Zoom meeting, saying what's on your mind, pose problems, get the team to just, figure something out. It doesn't even have to be shop talk. It can just be issues that where you have employees working together on something, building relationships, even remotely, and that is imperative if you want to move forward in our sort of hybrid world that we're working towards. It may seem strange. Another interesting way to do this is to eat lunches together remotely, and the food makes interactions easier, as you well know. So that's one solution. So we know the future of the corporate environment needs to be fluid, needs to be moved in a hybrid direction, and yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, food is a culture, right? I mean, I think that is the case, and no matter where in the world you are, food brings people together. And so I think that's a brilliant idea. Just have like a virtual luncheon. Everybody says, okay, well, I've got my KFC or I've got my shawarma, and they discuss what they're eating, and it kind of just loosens things up and makes it easier for people to have conversation. And so now conversation is not about me and the limelight's not on me. There's this prop that's taking some of the attention, and it becomes easier to just have conversations. So it can move from that to whatever really needs to be discussed much more easily, and so people are probably more relaxed, so they can give of themselves more. Another interesting study that was done helped to reveal that it has become more challenging for people in the workplace to be seen. A lot of people are very concerned that they've become invisible, whether they're, it doesn't matter where they are in the level of work. They're concerned about the fact that they're not being seen, and they're not being seen, right? And so how did you overcome something like that? Well, one of the suggestions that are being made is that they have regular meetings, that they actually initiate regular meetings so that they can be seen. They want to be communicating via whatever communication channels that the organization has made available, so that they're no longer invisible. At meetings, even those who may be a little more reluctant maybe to put up their hand and have something to say, they actually need to learn to and it's not easy. It's easier for some than for others, but to be noticed, they actually need to work harder to be seen, so that they can actually get to that next level.
Just to add to your point, it's very true that it is difficult for other people. Like, something to add in the work environment is there are many different types of people, but essentially you can sum them up into two groups. You have your extroverts, your people who like to work as a team. You've got your team players, and then you've got your people who like working by themselves. They like to get something done, and they like to do it by themselves. So those are your people who are attorneys. These are people who want to be accountable for their actions by themselves. And so those types of people will thrive in an environment where you're working from home, where you're working remotely. And that gives them, you could almost say, some sort of an advantage. But it is important for companies to have both sides, the people who work, who are good at working as a team, and the people who are good at working by themselves, because it's that unity that helps the company grow. You need them in all areas of a company. And so there's also the psychological side for these. How are these extroverts who like working in a team going to cope and move forward working remotely by themselves, or at least by themselves where they are in front of their computer? And so this is something interesting to see how companies are going to move forward. There was something Steve Jobs, what he did with Pixar, is he actually redesigned Pixar so that the offices for collaboration in mind. So rather than separating animators, executives, and editors into different buildings, he actually brought everyone under the same roof. and so the idea here was to change it so that you could have cross-pollination of ideas. And this worked so well that actually Apple incorporated this flow into their headquarters. So this was really an effective tool that he used. And how the question now is, how do we take that and incorporate that remotely? And this is technically possible to do this, but it's very circumstantial based on, you know, what your company's requirements are. And so the question is, you know, what do these companies need to do? They need to define the value of the collaboration within their organization. They need to evaluate the needs of the different teams within the company. They need to create an effective communication network in the workspace. And, you know, as we mentioned, they need to create a solution, a hybrid solution that works, caters for everyone.
Such important points, right? And so what comes out of that, isn't it the fact that so much planning is necessary? You don't just jump into this. And COVID kind of threw companies into this, and so a lot of them were basically just trying to keep their head above water, right? So how do I do this now? How do I separate my telephone systems? And so a lot of companies just said, well, look, we're not answering phones right now because nobody's at the office, so please send an email. But I mean, there are technologies out there which can allow for distributed telephone networks to be facilitated. And now it's a case of implementing these kind of things so that you can have this distributed customer service, distributed teamwork, and so on. But another big challenge, I think, that needs to be considered is, you know, we've all been very used to, well, let's first just discuss this massive paradigm shift that has happened over the years. I mean, it used in the 1970s, people had their own offices where they'd sit in an office and they'd be able to make phone calls and whatever. And then open plan offices came into being, and that was the do all and end all. And it just became sort of how businesses were run. And it was much more efficient for businesses because they could more effectively, or in fact, it was probably a lot more affordable for them to just squeeze more people into less space with just sort of these dividers between them and so on. It wasn't great for the people if they needed to communicate with people outside of the building because of the background noise and they couldn't have their privacy and so on. There were advantages to it, but I think some studies have been done subsequently, and I think it was agreed on that while open plan is great for the business, it's not great for the teams. It's not great for the workforce, right? And so now this is another huge paradigm shift where now you're back to your office, but that office is at home. And so what challenges are you facing at home now? You know, you've got, I mean, let's face it, as far as ergonomics are concerned, most businesses invested in good desks or workstations, good chairs. You know, most people at home had never invested in things like that. And so have companies thought about how staff's health may be affected by, physical health will be affected by them sitting at on sort of a dining room chair at a desk that might not be at an ideal height? How does it affect your blood circulation and so on? But that's just the physical side of things. But what about your morale? What about if you're a parent and you've got children at home? You know, it's more difficult to be private or to have silence if you have to deal with customers and so on. And
just to add to that, if I may, the studies have shown that people who work from home can potentially be 13.69% more productive and likely not to quit over the next 6 to 9 months. So if that's when you're working in a hybrid work environment. So what they've found so far, that the ideal ratio is to have 3 days where you're working from home and the rest of the time, your work time is actually at the office. So I think that gives sort of enough time where you have a productive work environment to work by yourself, but also still adds the element of collaboration at the workspace. There's a couple things to consider though, is, you know, when does an employee work from home? When must they work from home? Does everyone work from home at the same time? How do you break this up into groups of people working from home and at the office? Do you cater around the directors and around the CEOs because they need to manage everything? So that's something to consider. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you look at the management of these things. You know, when people are warming seats in an office, they're physically there. You know they're there. You know they're actively working. Well, you hope they're actively working, and it just becomes easier to manage them when they're there. But now, when you've got people working from home or from a hotel or wherever they may be, now there's more of a challenge, because now it's not about whether they're clocking in or clocking out anymore. Now it's more of a case of, and there has been a drive to this even within the office for larger corporations, that you have to manage the projects. So is there progress on the project? How is the project being managed? You know, and so that now brings another level of software that has to come into it, right? Where you can use software to manage projects and tasks and make sure that those tasks are being met. But that disconnect is still there. And I think the software industry, software development industry, have been doing this for quite some time, and they've been outsourcing to other countries, other than the country where the software is being managed from or required, to all over the world. And so what they do is they have regular stand-ups, and that's basically an agile project management methodology where on at least once a day, you have a very short meeting at the beginning of the day, just to make sure that there aren't any things that are kind of holding things up. And every team member has an opportunity, no more than 12 people in each stand-up, to make sure that there's nothing that's kind of blocking them and stopping the project from moving forward. And if there is, then the person who is facilitating the stand-up will then look for solutions, look to other team members to see what they can do to sort things out, and drive some kind of solution to make sure that that momentum with that project is continued. And I've got this feeling that that is going to start getting adopted by other industries as well, not only the tech industry, but you'll find that other industries will also start looking at how they can manage that sort of thing. In conclusion, anything else that you need to add before we wrap things up? I think that we're kind of running to the end of our time now.
Yeah, no, that's all good. I was just going to say that I guess it does actually push now to have effective project managers, because we want to find a balance of holding people accountable, but also having reasonable timeframes. And so, you know, we want project managers now need to adopt these new project management tools like Lark, for example, and some of the newer ones as well. And so, you know, this is very important, especially for, you know, in the IT industry, and, you know, any industry where you need to hold people accountable.
Absolutely. So the one thing that is definite, and that's change, right? There's going to be change as a result of this. And so how will the workforce adapt? How will managers adapt? And what is there for them to be able to lean on to help them to learn about what change they can expect and to move forward, so that that change can be facilitated, and to empower them to be more effective under these new and different circumstances that they need to adapt to. And so I think with our next talk show, let's focus on that, learning solutions that can be, because until recently, the team got together in a workshop at a central location generally, and they learned together there, and then they went their separate ways. But that's not possible anymore. And so now this change has brought about a different paradigm in terms of learning. So what is available for that, and how can that be facilitated? Chad, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I look forward to our next one. I think it's going to be.
Sounds good. Cheers.